Hi, I'm Eloise, a trainee counsellor at Bangor University, and in this video I will be presenting the pilot study, exploring the experiences of paid and unpaid for counselling clients in Wales. This is a study which I myself took part in researching in alongside Ananya Kale and Lorraine Morgan. Context of this study, unpaid for counselling refers to counselling that has been free of charge to the client. For instance, this could be counselling that has been accessed for a charity, an organisation, or public health service. Unpaid refers to private counselling or counselling that has been paid for by the client to some extent. Now, the literature suggests some really quite stark differences between paid and unpaid counselling on the whole, with paid clients expecting to have shorter wait times, more choices around the type of service they're receiving, more sessions, and higher reported overall levels of satisfaction, suggesting that paid may be the better option for a lot of people. However, this does not take into account the fact that many potential clients view paid for counselling as unaffordable and therefore are not able to access it. As someone who has experienced both paid and unpaid for counselling myself, this topic was of real interest to me. And when looking at it into it deeper with my research group, we were surprised to see that there was actually quite a large gap in the research, as there's currently no publicly available data comparing the client experiences of paid and unpaid for counselling. Furthermore, the data that we do have is looking at client experiences from the perspective of counsellors or the services themselves. There's a real lack of data that's really voicing the experiences of clients. In fact, some 25 years ago, Williams et al., who was a researcher at Bangor University, described the need for a greater attention to client voices in the literature, and it would appear there is still a need for this today, which is what this study aims to address whilst comparing the services of paid and unpaid for counselling. The study had 6 hypotheses, which are as follows. Participants with higher household income are more likely to access paid-for counselling services. Participants accessing paid-for counselling services will have lower referral and wait times than those accessing free services. Participants accessing paid-for counselling services will have more choice and control over the type of services they receive than those accessing free services. Participants accessing paid-for counselling services will report higher overall levels of satisfaction than those accessing free services. Participants accessing paid-for services will have more sessions of counselling than those accessing free services. And participants accessing paid-for services will report higher levels of satisfaction with the amount of counselling sessions received than those accessing free services. So all of these hypotheses were based on areas highlighted in the literature where counselling clients' experiences may differ. The sample of this study consisted of people who are aged 18 and over who had been living in Wales in the past 5 years and accessed counselling within that time. Participants were recruited using opportunity sampling, and this was done via advertisements that were shown on different social media platforms that were relating to Wales, and also word of mouth. The data set we ended up with after data cleaning was 51 participants. Of this, 50 used an English questionnaire and 1 participant used the Welsh language questionnaire. The design used for this study was quantitative independent groups, with the independent variable being whether a client had received paid or unpaid for counselling. The dependent variables were household income, referral or wait time, choice over the type of counselling received, overall client satisfaction, number of sessions, and satisfaction with number of sessions received. And this data was collected via an online questionnaire which was offered to participants in either Welsh or English. The questionnaire consisted of multiple choice questions, some being a Likert scale, as well as a few open questions which provided some qualitative data which was later used to help bring further insight and context to the results. The quantitative data, once collected, was then analysed using t-tests, chi-square tests, and post-hoc tests. Of the study's 6 hypotheses, 4 were found to be significant. However, 2 were not, being the participants accessing paid-for services will have more sessions of counselling than those accessing free services, which may give some context as to why the other hypothesis, participants accessing paid-for services will report higher levels of satisfaction with the amount of counselling sessions received than those accessing free services, was also insignificant. So the null hypothesis was accepted for both those hypotheses. Following on from the null hypotheses, we can see on average that both paid and unpaid for counselling clients attended counselling for the same amount of time and received the same amount of sessions. The modes from this study offer a bit of a glimpse into perhaps why their experiences may have differed. For instance, unpaid clients on average left counselling as they could not exceed the set number of sessions set by their organisation. This was different from paid clients who the majority were still either engaged in counselling or left due to financial reasons or because they had achieved their therapeutic goals, implying that perhaps for paid clients there was a greater level of personal choice in being able to leave counselling. On average, unpaid for counselling clients did not get to choose the medium of counselling they received or the time of sessions. Again, this was different for paid counselling clients who on average were able to choose these things. Unpaid clients also on average were not aware of the counsellor's therapeutic type, qualifications, or any memberships that counsellor may have been registered to. Again, with paid participants, they did have an awareness of all of these things. And despite this, both the paid and unpaid groups on average stated that being aware of this information was important to both of them. It would suggest that cost may be a barrier to those accessing paid-for counselling, which is supported by the current literature. In the study's qualitative data, clients on multiple occasions referred to counselling as, in quotation, expensive, and named it as one of the main reasons for leaving counselling, even if they were quoted saying that they had found the counselling helpful. This is particularly detrimental when considering those of lower incomes who, according to Abrams and Ceballos 2012 and Worcester et al. 2013, are more likely to experience high-stress situations and hardship, therefore may be more needing of counselling. However, it appears there are more barriers in place for them to access this. The literature and the results of this study indicate those of lower incomes, therefore, are not afforded equal opportunities to support. This is also supported by the research of Liu and Arduello, 2008. And with this in mind, it may paint a clearer picture of why participants for this study may have stated that overall those who received unpaid for counselling reported lower levels of overall satisfaction. Those who pay for counselling have lower wait times. Data suggests that wait times for those accessing unpaid may be longer than the literature reports. So in the literature, historically, unpaid for counselling has been reported as taking anything from a few weeks to a couple of months. However, our study found on average that participants waited around 16 weeks, which is considerably longer. And we feel this may correspond with the reported levels of demand for counselling. So reports are suggesting more and more now that there is a rising demand for counselling, and yet unfortunately the services are not currently there in place to meet that demand, perhaps more so for those who are not able to pay for counselling. Data also suggests those accessing unpaid for counselling do not have the same level of choice around the type of counselling they receive. The literature suggests that this may negatively impact client outcomes, especially when considering the client's level of autonomy may be lowered due to this. When considering the implications of this study, I think one of the more important areas to focus on is how counsellors and counselling services may use this information to help better improve experiences of clients. Two areas that this study highlights are counselling services may benefit from promoting choice and client autonomy over the type of counselling services they receive. Now, taking on a person-centered approach and encouraging client choice is already a value that is incorporated into most public healthcare settings. However, our data suggests that this is not being carried out in some cases for unpaid clients. So improvements here may need to happen. Additionally, greater access to information to be able to actually make informed decisions may improve client outcomes. This is something for counselling services to consider. Again, this is something that would be quite achievable for counselling services to do, to provide more information, but this data suggests that this is something that perhaps has not been happening, and improving that may boost client outcomes. The study sample may not fully represent some members of the study's targeted population, as people over the age of 60 were not in the sample. In addition to this, in terms of gender, participants were predominantly female, which may not reflect the greater population, but it may actually reflect population of people seeking counselling, as according to National Statistics 2020, women are far more likely to seek mental health such as counselling as opposed to other genders. Although there is a lack of representation in some areas in the sample, this is a pilot study, so we would expect that if the study was to be done again on a larger scale, that we would see a much more diverse sample, which would be of particular interest as genderqueer, trans and non-binary people lack a lot of representation currently in the literature, according to Hunt 2013. The study also took a quantitative approach, although we did collect some qualitative data. This was based on the resources and time restraints that we encountered. So it was judged that this would be the most appropriate study design. However, for future research, in order to gain far more rich data and deeper understanding of this area, which does currently lack a lot of insight, a mixed methodology may be preferable. Also, within the questionnaire, participants were asked what type of therapy they received, whether that was in person or remote, for instance. And in the open-ended questions, some participants mentioned that they had received blended therapy, so a combination of two different types. This is not currently listed as an option on our questionnaire, so this is something that we would look to include in the future. The pilot study produced statistically significant results, suggesting the benefit of doing the study on a larger scale. This study on a larger scale, I would argue, could be of great value to the field of counselling, as client insights are arguably of vital consideration when developing counselling services, and according to current literature, have been lacking representation. Additionally, if the study was to be carried out on a larger scale, another consideration for an area of interest may be gender and the impact that this may have on client experiences. As previously discussed, genderqueer people are often underreported in the literature. And according to Bess and Stab in 2009, many genderqueer, non-binary and trans people face barriers that cisgender clients may not when accessing counselling, making them a particular area of interest. Thirdly, during the collection of data, an area of interest for further research was actually raised by the participants themselves. In a comment on one of our Reddit study advert posts, someone by the username Impossible Jane commented that they wish that this included those of us that tried to get counselling through the GP. A participant in our study also reported similar feelings, stating that they had waited for 6 months for a session, only to be told that they did not actually need the help. Although people who have attempted to access counselling but have not been successful was not a particular area of focus on our study, it's clear to see how this could have a really impactful effect on a person's experience and view of counselling, and maybe a really vital thing for counselling services to be aware of when trying to develop services that are accessible and beneficial to clients. Thanks for taking the time to listen to the presentation. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them down below, and I'll be sure to reply to them.